Eleanor's mornings began in the hush of her small bungalow, the kind of quiet that settles over a house when its last true laughter has faded. She moved slowly, her steps measured, her cane tapping a gentle rhythm on the worn linoleum. The kitchen was filled with the soft light of early day, filtered through curtains that had once been white but now bore the gentle yellow of age. She filled the kettle, her hands trembling just enough to spill a few drops, and set it on the stove. The ritual was as much for herself as for anyone who might be watching. She had learned, over the years, that the world expected certain things from a woman her age, and she had become an expert at giving them exactly what they wanted to see. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. Eleanor's house sat at the end of a quiet street, its paint peeling, the garden overgrown with wildflowers and weeds. She liked it that way. It gave the impression of neglect, of a life lived on the margins. The neighbors, most of them younger couples with children, would sometimes glance her way as she shuffled to the mailbox. Their voices would drop, their eyes soft with pity. "Poor Eleanor," they'd say. "She's all alone now. It's a shame her children don't visit more." She would smile and wave, her lips trembling in a way that suggested both gratitude and frailty. She knew what they thought of her, and she encouraged it. The less they suspected, the safer she was. Inside, the house was a museum of modest living. The furniture was old, the upholstery faded and threadbare. Family photos lined the mantel, but even these were carefully chosen. Pictures of her late husband, of Ethan and her daughter, as children, of holidays long past. There were no signs of luxury. No hints of the wealth she had quietly accumulated over a lifetime of careful planning and discreet investments. Her car, parked in the cracked driveway, was a battered sedan that coughed and sputtered on cold mornings. She wore the same gray cardigan most days, her shoes sensible and scuffed. Even her jewelry was chosen for its plainness, a simple locket, a thin gold band, nothing that would draw attention. But beneath the surface, Eleanor's mind was as sharp as ever. She had always been observant. A woman who noticed the small things, the way a person's eyes flickered when they lied, the subtle shift in tone when a conversation turned to money. After her husband died, she had retreated into herself, letting the world believe she was broken, vulnerable, and alone. It was a mask she wore with skill, one that allowed her to move through life unnoticed, gathering information, watching, waiting. She had learned that people made mistakes when they underestimated her, and she had become a master at turning those mistakes to her advantage. Ethan, her eldest, had always been a source of both pride and worry. As a boy, he had been clever, quick to learn, but also quick to look for the easy way out. He was ambitious, but not in the way that built things. He wanted shortcuts, wanted to win without effort. When he married Jessica, Eleanor saw the danger immediately. Jessica was beautiful, charming, and utterly so, but her smiles were too bright, her laughter too loud, her compliments too practiced. She was always watching, always calculating, always looking for the angle that would benefit her most. In the 3 years since their wedding, Ethan and Jessica's visits had become more frequent. At first, Eleanor had allowed herself a flicker of hope that they were coming out of genuine concern, that perhaps the loss of her husband had drawn them closer. But it didn't take long to see the truth. They arrived with grocery store cupcakes and cheap wine, their smiles wide and their eyes scanning the room. The conversation would start with pleasantries. "How are you feeling, Mom? Are you eating enough? Do you need help with anything around the house?" But it always, inevitably, circled back to money. That Ethan would sit at her kitchen table, his hands folded, his voice dripping with concern. "Mom, are you sure you're okay? You know, life is expensive these days. Maybe you should think about the future, about what will happen if you can't take care of yourself." Jessica would chime in, her hand resting on Eleanor's arm, her tones syrupy sweet. "We just want what's best for you. Maybe you should let us help." Eleanor would nod, sigh, and murmur about how grateful she was for their care, all the while watching the way their eyes lingered on the stack of unpaid bills she'd left out on purpose. She had become an expert at playing the part. She complained of imaginary aches, let her voice tremble when she talked about the cost of groceries, and even let the power bill go unpaid once so they could see the overdue notice. She wanted them to believe she was a burden, a woman on the edge of collapse, someone who would be easy to manipulate, and it worked. Their questions became more direct, their visits more insistent, their offers of help more pointed. But Eleanor was always watching, always listening, filing away every word and gesture for the day she knew would come. She kept a small notebook in her bedside drawer, hidden beneath a stack of old letters. In it, she recorded every conversation, every request for money, every subtle threat or manipulation. She noted the dates of their visits, the excuses they gave for needing cash, the way Jessica's eyes would narrow when Eleanor hesitated. She wrote down the details of their lives that they let slip when they thought she wasn't paying attention, the mounting credit card debt, the arguments about money, the dreams of a bigger house, a better life. She knew more about their finances than they realized, and she used that knowledge to reinforce her disguise. When Ethan and Jessica weren't around, Eleanor allowed herself to relax. She would sit in her favorite chair by the window, a cup of tea in hand, and watch the world go by. She read the financial pages of the newspaper, checked her investment accounts online, and made quiet phone calls to her lawyer and her accountant. She managed her affairs with a precision that would have surprised anyone who saw only the trembling hands and the stooped shoulders. She was careful, always careful, never leaving a trace of her true situation where anyone might find it. The neighbors, for their part, remained convinced of her poverty. They brought her casseroles and offered to mow her lawn, their kindness genuine but tinged with the satisfaction of helping someone less fortunate. Eleanor accepted their help with gratitude, never letting on that she could have hired a gardener or ordered takeout every night if she wished. She understood the value of being underestimated, of letting people believe she was exactly what she appeared to be. Ethan and Jessica's questions became more pointed as time went on. They asked about her will, about the deed to the house, about whether she had considered moving to a retirement community. Jessica, in particular, was skilled at wrapping her inquiries in concern. "You know, Eleanor, these old houses can be so much work. Wouldn't it be easier to live somewhere with people your own age, where you don't have to worry about repairs?" Eleanor would nod, her eyes wide with feigned anxiety, and promised to think about it. She let them believe they were wearing her down. She let them see her struggle with the groceries, let them hear her sigh over the cost of a new water heater, let them believe she was one step away from asking for help. She knew that the more vulnerable she appeared, the more confident they would become. And the more confident they became, the more careless they would be. Eleanor's days passed in this careful balance of performance and observation. She played her part to perfection, never letting the mask slip, never revealing the steel beneath the surface. She waited, patient as a spider, for the moment when their greed would finally push them to make their move. She knew it was coming. She could see it in the way Ethan's eyes darted around the room, in the way Jessica's questions grew bolder, in the way their visits always ended with a request for just a little help, just until things got better. Eleanor's world shifted the moment Ethan and Jessica presented their plan for the new house. The glossy photos of a sprawling mansion, the folder thick with mortgage documents, and the urgency in their voices all signaled that the time for subtlety had passed. They sat in her modest living room, the contrast between their grand ambitions and her humble surroundings as stark as the difference between their intentions and her own. Ethan's eyes gleamed with anticipation as he described the 5 bedrooms, the pool, the perfect downstairs suite for Eleanor. Jessica's voice was honeyed, her hand resting on Eleanor's knee, but her gaze was sharp, calculating. "You'd be so much better cared for with us, Eleanor. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." The words were meant to comfort, but Eleanor heard the threat beneath them. She smiled, nodded, and let her voice tremble as she asked questions about the loan, about what it meant to be a cosigner, about what would happen if something went wrong. Ethan's patience wore thin as he explained, again and again, that it was just a formality, that she had nothing to worry about, that they would take care of everything. Jessica chimed in with reassurances, but Eleanor could see the cracks in their performance. Their urgency was palpable, their answers rehearsed but growing more desperate with each of her innocent-sounding questions. She let them believe she was overwhelmed, that she was on the verge of giving in. When they left that evening, promising to return the next day to help her understand the paperwork, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table long after the sun had set, her mind racing. She knew this was no ordinary request for help. This was a carefully constructed trap, one that would leave her with nothing if she made a single misstep. She reached for her phone and dialed Victoria, her lawyer, and one of the few people who knew the truth about Eleanor's finances. Victoria answered on the second ring, her voice brisk and reassuring. Eleanor explained everything: the house, the loan, the pressure. The way Ethan's demeanor had shifted from concern to barely concealed frustration. "I need you to look into this property, Victoria, and I need to know everything you can find about Ethan and Jessica's financial situation. I think they're trying to scam me." Victoria promised to get to work immediately, her confidence a bomb to Eleanor's frayed nerves. Next, Eleanor called Thomas, the private investigator Victoria had recommended years ago. Thomas was discreet, efficient, and had a knack for uncovering secrets people thought were well hidden. "I need you to follow my son and his wife," Eleanor said, her voice steady, despite the storm of emotions inside her. "I want to know who they're meeting with, what they're doing, and I want it all kept confidential." Thomas agreed without hesitation, and Eleanor felt a small measure of control return. The next 48 hours were a blur of quiet activity. While Ethan and Jessica believed she was agonizing over the decision, Eleanor was orchestrating her own investigation. Victoria called with updates. The house was listed at $280,000, not $200,000, as Ethan claimed. There was a side agreement with the seller that would allow Ethan and Jessica to pocket the difference. Thomas reported that they had met with a real estate attorney who had explained the foreclosure process in detail. They were planning not just to buy a house, but to set Eleanor up as the fall guy if anything went wrong. Eleanor's performance became even more convincing. She let her hand shake as she made tea, let her voice quiver as she asked Ethan and Jessica to explain the documents again. She feigned confusion over the numbers, the legal terms, the responsibilities of a co-signer. Ethan grew impatient, his tone sharper, his reassurances more forceful. Jessica tried to smooth things over, but Eleanor could see the anxiety in her eyes. They were afraid she might back out, that their plan might unravel before it began. On the third day, Ethan and Jessica returned, their smiles brittle, their nerves frayed. Eleanor greeted them with homemade cookies and coffee in chipped cups, her demeanor that of a woman trying desperately to do the right thing for her family. "I've thought a lot about what you said," she began, her voice trembling. "You've always taken care of me. Maybe it's time I did something for you." Relief washed over their faces, but Eleanor continued, insisting she needed to read every word of the documents before signing. Ethan's frustration boiled over. "Mom, we already explained everything. You just need to sign here and here." Jessica tried to intervene, her voice soothing, but Eleanor could see the panic in her eyes. She asked more questions, each one designed to probe the weaknesses in their plan. "What happens if you get divorced? What if one of you loses your job? What if there's another economic crisis?" Ethan and Jessica stumbled through their answers, their confidence eroding with each new question. Eleanor pressed on, her questions seemingly naive but devastatingly precise. She watched as their composure crumbled, as their desperation became impossible to hide. Finally, she agreed to sign, but only after one more night to think it over. Ethan wanted to protest, but Jessica stopped him, sensing that pushing too hard might ruin everything. That night, Eleanor called Victoria again. "I have everything I need from this first phase," she said. "The recordings are perfect. Now I need you to prepare the second part of the plan." Victoria laughed softly, her admiration for Eleanor clear. "You're a force of nature," she said. "Let's make sure they never see it coming." The next morning, Eleanor sent a text to Ethan and Jessica. "I've made my decision. I'm ready to sign. Come whenever you can." Their reply was almost immediate, their excitement barely contained. Eleanor spent the next hour preparing, donning her oldest dress, letting her hair fall untidily, practicing the slight tremor in her hands. She was the picture of vulnerability. But inside she was steel. When Ethan and Jessica arrived, they brought with them a sense of triumph. They entered her home like conquerors, carrying folders, special pens, and even a bottle of cheap champagne. Eleanor played her part to perfection, her voice trembling as she led them to the living room. "I didn't sleep a wink last night," she confessed, "but you're right. You know more about these things than I do." She served them coffee, her hands shaking just enough to spill a few drops. Ethan spread the documents on the table, pointing to the places she needed to sign. Jessica's voice was syrupy as she promised a celebratory lunch after the paperwork was done. Eleanor took the first document, her hands trembling, her eyes squinting as she pretended to struggle with the small print. "These words make me dizzy," she murmured, but she read every clause with the precision of a seasoned lawyer. She saw the trap, not just a cosigner, but a total guarantee that included all her assets. She asked more questions, each one a carefully placed test. "It says here, real and personal property. Does that mean my things, too?" Jessica lied smoothly, but Eleanor noted the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Ethan grew more impatient, urging her to sign. Eleanor continued to stall, reading slowly, asking for her special glasses, leaving the room to send a coded text to Victoria. The fish are in the net. When she returned, she asked for one last promise. If anything goes wrong, you'll tell me right away, won't you? Jessica assured her, but her words were recorded by the device hidden in Eleanor's locket. Ethan added, if we have to use your house as collateral, we'll take care of you. Their confessions were complete, their intentions laid bare. Eleanor signed the documents, her performance flawless. Ethan and Jessica celebrated, toasting to their future. They left with the signed papers, believing they had won. Eleanor watched them go, her expression unreadable, already planning the next move in her quiet war. The morning of the bank meeting dawned gray and cool, the kind of day that seemed to press down on the city with a hush of anticipation. Eleanor dressed with meticulous care, choosing a faded skirt and a cardigan with a missing button, her hair pulled back in a loose bun that made her look every bit the frail widow she had so carefully portrayed for years. She dabbed a touch of powder on her cheeks to make her skin appear even paler, and practiced her hesitant walk in the hallway mirror, letting her shoulders slump and her hands tremble just so. Every detail mattered. Today was the day her performance would reach its climax. Ethan arrived to pick her up, his face drawn and tense, his words clipped as he helped her into the car. He tried to make small talk, but his mind was clearly elsewhere, his eyes darting nervously to the dashboard clock as if time itself were an adversary. Eleanor responded with soft, distracted murmurs, her gaze fixed on the passing houses, her thoughts already in the bank manager's office. She could feel the weight of the recorder in her purse, the locket at her throat, the invisible armor of all the evidence she had so carefully gathered. She was ready. The bank was a modern building of glass and steel, its lobby echoing with the low hum of business. Robert, the manager, greeted them at the door, his handshake firm, his eyes kind but sharp. He led them to his office, a space of polished wood and muted colors, where a computer screen glowed on the desk and a stack of documents waited in a neat pile. Ethan sat stiffly, his hands clasped in his lap, while Eleanor settled into her chair with a sigh, her movements slow and deliberate. Robert began with the formalities, explaining the terms of the loan, the responsibilities of a cosigner, the importance of understanding every clause. Eleanor played her part to perfection, asking simple questions, feigning confusion at the technical language, letting her voice quiver as she spoke of her worries. Ethan interrupted often, his tone impatient, eager to move things along. Mom understands everything, he insisted, his smile tight. She's just nervous. It's a big step for her. Robert nodded, but his eyes lingered on Eleanor, as if he sensed there was more beneath the surface. He turned to his computer, typing in her information, and then paused, his brow furrowing. Mrs. Eleanor, could you please confirm your current financial situation for our records? Do you have any other accounts or assets we should be aware of? Eleanor produced her old passbook, the one with the modest balance she had maintained for appearances, and handed it over with trembling hands. This is all I have, she said softly, her eyes downcast. Robert examined the passbook, then turned back to his computer, his fingers moving quickly over the keys. The silence in the room grew heavy, broken only by the faint clicking of the keyboard. Finally, Robert looked up, his expression unreadable. According to our records, Mrs. Eleanor, you have accounts at 3 different banks, with a combined balance of nearly $3 million. You also have several investment properties, a diversified portfolio, and a trust that generates significant monthly income. Is this correct? The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Ethan's face went slack, his mouth opening and closing as he stared at the screen. Eleanor kept her eyes on her lap, her hands folded neatly, her heart pounding with a strange mix of triumph and sorrow. I didn't want to make a fuss, she murmured, her voice small. My late husband always said it was best not to talk about money. Ethan finally found his voice, but it was thin and reedy, stripped of all confidence. Mom, you never told me about any of this. You always said you were struggling. You asked me for help with bills. His words trailed off, the realization dawning that everything he thought he knew about his mother was a carefully constructed illusion. Robert cleared his throat, his tone shifting from professional to something more pointed. Mr. Ethan, given your mother's financial situation, are you certain you wish to proceed with this loan? It's a significant responsibility, and the bank must be sure all parties are acting in good faith. Ethan bristled, his pride wounded, but his greed undiminished. Of course, we want to proceed. My mother has already agreed. She's signed everything. There's no risk for anyone. Eleanor watched him, her expression gentle but unyielding. She could see the calculation in his eyes, the way he was already trying to adjust his plan to this new reality. He was not ashamed, only angry that he had been outmaneuvered. She felt a pang of grief for the son she had lost, but she steeled herself. There was still more to be done. Robert produced a new set of documents, explaining that, given the circumstances, the bank required additional signature sworn statements of intent, liability waivers, authorizations for recorded conversations. Ethan signed them all without reading, his mind still reeling from the revelation of Eleanor's wealth. Each signature was another link in the chain of evidence, another step toward the justice Eleanor had so patiently prepared. When the paperwork was finished, Robert stood and shook Eleanor's hand with genuine respect. "It's been a pleasure, Mrs. Eleanor. Your husband was a wise man." He turned to Ethan, his tone cool. "I hope you appreciate the opportunity you've been given." Ethan muttered something unintelligible, his eyes fixed on the floor. The drive home was silent, the tension in the car thick and suffocating. Ethan gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Eleanor sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the passing scenery. She could feel the storm brewing beside her, the anger and confusion radiating from her son like heat from a dying fire. When they reached her house, Ethan finally exploded. "Why did you lie to me? Why did you pretend to be poor? I thought you needed my help. I thought you were struggling." His voice was raw, desperate, but Eleanor heard the accusation beneath the words. She turned to him, her eyes clear and steady. "Did you really think I didn't notice when your visits increased only when you needed money? Did you think I didn't see the way Jessica looked at my house, my things? You never came to see me, Ethan. You came to see what you could take." Ethan's face crumpled, his bravado collapsing under the weight of her words. He tried to protest, to explain, but Eleanor cut him off. "You broke my finger when I refused to sign. You threatened me, manipulated me, tried to make me believe I was a burden. That's not love, Ethan. That's greed." The silence that followed was heavy with all the things left unsaid. All the years of disappointment and betrayal. Ethan slumped in his seat, his head in his hands. "What do you want me to do?" he whispered. Eleanor's answer was calm, measured. "Cancel the house. Tell Jessica the truth. Get help for your problems. Stop trying to steal from your own mother." Ethan shook his head, his voice rising in panic. "We can't. We've already signed contracts. Jessica's told everyone. If we back out now, we lose everything." Eleanor's smile was cold, her eyes hard. "You're not worried about me. You're worried about what Jessica will think, about what people will say. You're still thinking about yourself." Ethan stood abruptly, his movements jerky. "This isn't over, Mom. You signed those papers. If we can't pay, the bank will come after you. Then you'll need us." Eleanor's voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a knife. "You made your choice, Ethan. Now you'll live with it." After he left, Eleanor sat in the dim light of her living room, the weight of the day pressing down on her. She called Victoria, her voice steady. "It's done. I have everything. His confession, his threats, his signature on every document." Victoria's laughter was low and fierce. "You're remarkable, Eleanor. Now we finish this." The next days passed in a blur of quiet anticipation. Thomas kept her informed of Ethan and Jessica's movements. They continued with the house purchase, spending money they didn't have, acting as if nothing had changed. Jessica called, her voice syrupy with false concern, but Eleanor played her part, feigning confusion, letting Jessica believe the charade was still intact. Ethan returned once more, desperate and broken, begging for forgiveness, for another chance. Eleanor listened, her heart aching, but her resolve unshaken. She demanded the truth, demanded he take responsibility, but he could not. His pride, his fear, his greed were too great. He left, slamming the door behind him, his threats echoing in the empty house. Eleanor sat in the silence, her mind clear. The time for patience was over. The time for justice had come. She called Victoria, her voice strong. "We're ready. Let's show them what happens when you underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose." The days that followed the confrontation at the bank unfolded with a sense of inevitability, as if the world itself had been waiting for Eleanor to finally step out from behind her carefully constructed mask. The news of Ethan and Jessica's arrest spread quickly through the neighborhood, whispers turning to open conversation as police cars arrived at their apartment and officers escorted them out in handcuffs. The neighbors who had once pitied Eleanor now watched her with a new kind of respect, their eyes wide with the realization that the frail old woman they thought they knew had orchestrated a masterstroke of justice. Eleanor, for her part, moved through these days with a quiet dignity, her every action deliberate and calm. She answered questions from the police, provided her recordings and documents to Victoria, and sat for interviews with detectives and social workers. Each time she recounted her story, she felt the weight of years of silence lifting from her shoulders. Victoria worked tirelessly, assembling the case with the precision of a surgeon. She coordinated with prosecutors, shared evidence with law enforcement, and ensured that every detail was airtight. The recordings Eleanor had made of Ethan's threats, Jessica's manipulations, the confessions at the bank became the backbone of the prosecution's case. Thomas, the private investigator, provided photographs, timelines, and witness statements that painted a clear picture of a pattern of abuse and exploitation. Robert, the bank manager, testified to the events in his office, his professional reputation lending further credibility to Eleanor's account. The case against Ethan and Jessica was overwhelming, and their defense crumbled almost immediately as the legal proceedings moved forward. Eleanor found herself at the center of a growing storm of public attention. The local news picked up the story first, then regional outlets, and soon, national media were calling her for interviews. Headlines described her as the widow who outsmarted the scammers and the grandmother who fought back. Journalists wanted to know how she had managed to keep her true self hidden for so long, how she had gathered her evidence, how she had found the strength to stand up to her own son. Eleanor answered their questions with humility, always careful to emphasize that she was not unique, that there were thousands of others like her who suffered in silence. She spoke about the importance of vigilance, of trusting one's instincts, of never underestimating the power of experience. The attention brought with it a flood of letters, emails, and phone calls from people across the country. Elderly men and women reached out to share their own stories of financial abuse, of children and relatives who had taken advantage of their trust. Some called simply to thank her for giving them hope, for showing them that it was possible to fight back. Others asked for advice, for referrals to lawyers or social workers, for help in navigating the confusing world of elder law. Eleanor responded to as many as she could, her days filled with conversations that were by turns heartbreaking and inspiring. She realized that her story had become something larger than herself, a beacon for those who had been made to feel invisible. It was Victoria who first suggested that they do more than simply respond to individual cases. "We have the knowledge, the resources, and the momentum," she said one afternoon, as they sat in Eleanor's kitchen, the table covered in stacks of letters and legal documents. "Why not create something permanent? A foundation, maybe, dedicated to protecting seniors from financial abuse." The idea took root quickly, and within weeks, the Eleanor Foundation for Elder Protection was born. Victoria became its legal director, Thomas its head of investigations, and Robert its financial advisor. They set up a small office in a converted house not far from Eleanor's own, its walls soon lined with photographs of the people they had helped. The foundation's work was demanding and often difficult. They received calls from all over the country, each case unique but heartbreakingly familiar. There were widows whose children had drained their savings, retirees whose caregivers had forged their signatures, men and women who had been pressured to sign over their homes or life insurance policies. The team worked tirelessly, investigating claims, gathering evidence, and connecting victims with legal and financial resources. They partnered with law enforcement, trained social workers, and lobbied for stronger protections for the elderly. Eleanor became a frequent speaker at conferences and community events, her story inspiring others to take action. The legal case against Ethan and Jessica moved swiftly. The evidence was overwhelming, and both eventually accepted plea deals. Ethan was sentenced to 5 years in prison for fraud, extortion, and elder abuse. Jessica received 4 years for conspiracy and complicity. The judge ordered restitution for all their victims, including Jessica's mother and Ethan's uncle, and mandated that neither could ever work in any field involving the care of vulnerable adults. The courtroom was packed on the day of sentencing, reporters and victims' families filling every seat. Eleanor sat in the front row, her posture straight, her expression calm. She listened as the judge praised her courage and determination, as the prosecutor described the impact her actions had had on the community. When the sentences were read, she felt a sense of closure, not just for herself but for everyone who had suffered at the hands of those they trusted. The foundation's work continued to grow. They helped dozens of families recover stolen assets, provided legal support to victims who had nowhere else to turn, and worked with lawmakers to draft new legislation protecting seniors from financial exploitation. Eleanor's story was cited in congressional hearings, her testimony helping to shape new laws and policies. She received awards and honors, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which she accepted with a simple speech about the power of resilience and the importance of never giving up. Eleanor's days were busy, but she found time for quiet moments in her garden, for tea with friends, for long walks through the neighborhood that had once pitied her. She kept in touch with the people she had helped, celebrating their victories and offering comfort in their setbacks. She became a mentor to younger advocates, sharing the lessons she had learned about patience, strategy, and the importance of never underestimating one's own strength. One afternoon, as she sat in her office reviewing new cases, the phone rang. It was a woman named Martina, her voice trembling as she described how her son had begun pressuring her to sell her house and move into a nursing home. The details were painfully familiar: the sudden increase in visits, the questions about her will, the subtle suggestions that she was no longer capable of living on her own. Eleanor listened patiently, offering reassurance and practical advice. She promised to connect Martina with a local attorney, to have Thomas look into her son's finances, to be there every step of the way. As she hung up the phone, Eleanor looked around her office, at the photographs of the families she had helped, at the letters of thanks pinned to the bulletin board, at the medal that hung on the wall. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not just for what she had accomplished, but for the knowledge that her story had become a lifeline for others. She knew there would always be those who sought to take advantage of the vulnerable. But she also knew that there were people willing to fight back, to stand up, to refuse to be victims. She was one of them, and she was determined to help others find their own strength. Eleanor's life settled into a new rhythm, one shaped not by the quiet routines of a solitary widow but by the steady pulse of purpose. The Eleanor Foundation for Elder Protection became her second home. Its modest office, humming with activity from morning until evening, the phone rang constantly, each call a new story of betrayal, fear, or confusion. Some callers were hesitant, their voices barely above a whisper, as they described the first signs of Stana's son asking for access to a bank account, a niece suggesting a temporary loan, a neighbor offering to help with paperwork. Others were frantic, their savings already gone, their homes at risk, their trust shattered by those they had loved most. Eleanor listened to each story with patience and empathy, her own experiences lending her a unique understanding of the pain and shame that so often accompanied financial abuse. The Foundation's team grew quickly. Victoria recruited young lawyers eager to make a difference, training them in the nuances of elder law and the delicate art of interviewing traumatized clients. Thomas expanded his network of investigators, teaching them how to follow paper trails, uncover hidden assets, and document patterns of coercion. Robert developed workshops for seniors, teaching them how to recognize red flags, protect their assets, and assert their rights. The office became a place of both refuge and action, a safe haven where the vulnerable could find not only comfort, but also the tools to fight back. Eleanor found herself at the center of a growing movement. She was invited to speak at conferences, to testify before legislative committees, to consult with banks and social service agencies. Her story was featured in magazines and documentaries, her face becoming a symbol of resilience and wisdom. She used her platform to advocate for stronger laws, better training for professionals, and more resources for victims. She met with lawmakers, sharing the stories of those who had called her foundation, urging them to see the human cost behind the statistics. She pushed for mandatory reporting of suspected financial abuse, for stricter penalties for offenders, for public awareness campaigns that would reach even the most isolated seniors. The work was exhausting, but Eleanor drew strength from the people she helped. She remembered the names and faces of those who had walked through the Foundation's doors, their relief when they realized they were not alone, their gratitude when justice was served. She kept a scrapbook of thank you notes, photographs, and newspaper clippings, a tangible reminder of the lives she had touched. She celebrated each victory, no matter how small: a stolen check recovered, a fraudulent loan canceled, a family reunited after years of estrangement. She mourned the losses, too, the cases where the damage could not be undone, where the wounds ran too deep for the law to heal. As the foundation's reputation grew, so did the complexity of the cases they handled. Some involved elaborate schemes spanning multiple states, with teams of scammers targeting dozens of victims. Others were heartbreakingly simple: a lonely widower signing over his home to a caregiver, a grandmother pressured into changing her will. Eleanor and her team learned to navigate the labyrinth of legal, financial, and emotional challenges each case presented. They built partnerships with law enforcement, social workers, and medical professionals, creating a network of support that extended far beyond the walls of their office. Eleanor's own family became a subject of public fascination. Journalists asked about Ethan and Jessica, about the pain of betrayal and the possibility of forgiveness. Eleanor answered honestly, acknowledging the complexity of her feelings. She spoke of the love she had once felt for her son, the grief of losing him to greed, the hope that he might one day find redemption. She refused to let bitterness define her, choosing instead to focus on the good that had come from her ordeal. She visited Ethan in prison, their conversations awkward but necessary, each visit a step toward understanding if not reconciliation. She wrote to Jessica, offering her the same compassion she extended to every other victim and perpetrator who crossed her path. The foundation's work began to influence policy at the highest levels. Lawmakers cited Eleanor's story in debates over elder protection laws, and her testimony helped shape new regulations for banks, nursing homes, and financial advisors. She was invited to the White House to participate in a roundtable on elder justice, her insights shaping national strategy. She received letters from people she had never met: seniors who had found the courage to speak up, families who had been reunited, professionals who had changed the way they approached their work. Each letter was a reminder that her fight was not just personal, but part of a larger struggle for dignity and respect. Eleanor's days were long, but she found moments of peace in the garden, behind the foundation's office. She tended the flowers herself, her hands steady and sure as she pruned roses and planted new bulbs. The garden became a gathering place for clients and staff, a space for quiet conversation and reflection. Eleanor often sat there in the evenings, a cup of tea in hand, watching the sun set over the city. She thought of her husband, of the life they had built together, of the lessons he had taught her about patience, resilience, and the quiet power of observation. She thought of the years she had spent hiding her strength, and of the freedom she now felt in using it to help others. The foundation continued to grow, its impact spreading across the country. New offices opened in other cities, each one staffed by people inspired by Eleanor's example. The organization developed training programs for police officers, bank tellers, and healthcare workers, teaching them how to spot the signs of financial abuse and intervene before it was too late. They launched a national hotline, providing immediate assistance to those in crisis. They created educational materials in multiple languages, reaching seniors in rural and immigrant communities who were often overlooked by traditional services. Eleanor became a mentor to a new generation of advocates, sharing her knowledge and experience with those who would carry the work forward. She encouraged them to listen carefully, to trust their instincts, to never underestimate the power of persistence. She reminded them that every case was unique, that every victim deserved respect and compassion, that justice was not always swift, but was always worth pursuing. She watched with pride as her protégés took on leadership roles, their energy and passion breathing new life into the movement she had helped to create. As the years passed, Eleanor's influence only grew. She was honored by universities, advocacy groups, and government agencies, her name becoming synonymous with elder justice. She continued to work at the foundation, her presence a steadying force in times of crisis. She remained humble, always quick to credit her team, always mindful of the trust placed in her by those she served. She never forgot the lessons of her own ordeal, the importance of vigilance, the danger of complacency, the strength that could be found in even the most unlikely places. Eleanor's story became a touchstone for others, facing similar challenges. Her example inspired books, films, and public service campaigns, her image appearing on posters and billboards urging seniors to protect themselves and seek help if needed. She was invited to speak at international conferences, her message resonating with audiences around the world. She continued to receive letters from people whose lives had been changed by her courage, each one a testament to the ripple effect of a single act of resistance. In the quiet moments between meetings and phone calls, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought of the years spent in the shadows, of the pain and betrayal that had threatened to break her, of the decision to fight back instead of giving in. She knew that her work was far from over, that there would always be new challenges, new victims, new battles to fight, but she faced the future with confidence, her heart steady, her purpose clear, her legacy already taking root in the lives of those she had helped and inspired.